Okay, kiddos, I'm going to start doing a series of the videos about cutting and assembling each one of those collars that I showed you how to draft. So the first thing I want to go over with you is this product right here. It's called interfacing, and we may or may not have used some of it for the fashion class. I usually kept it in that big long bin that had like pattern pieces. It's called fusible interfacing. The fusible part means that there is a glue. So when you purchase this, there's a rough side, and that roughness is created by little droplets of glue that adhere to the wrong side of your fabric. The reason why you want to have a supply of interfacing in your studio is that it adds just the slightest bit of oomph for collars, for waistbands. If you're doing a bunch of buttonholes, it gives the weave to your base material a little bit more strength to it. So having a supply, you don't need to go buy a whole bolt of it. I buy a bolt because I burn through a lot of it when I make suits and things of that sort. So this is interfacing. You only need to interface one side of your collar. So when I say cut 2 of the Mandarin collar, you will cut 1 of a piece of interfacing for it. So we're going to start with the Mandarin collar. This is the first one that we drafted, and I've got it on the fold. I'm using an old pillowcase, so I'm going to use the fold of that pillowcase, pin this guy down. I'm going to cut 2 of them, and then I'm going to cut 1 of the interfacing on the fold as well. So let me get that all pinned in and cut. Oh, and big important part of this, when we drafted this pattern, we accounted for a 1/2 inch of seam allowance down along this bottom edge, because that's where it's going to set into your collar, your neck edge. But we did not, when we drafted it, account for the seam allowance that has to happen up here and along that edge. So you can measure it for a 1/2 inch. I think soon you're going to get a feel for what a 1/2 inch feels like when you're sewing and also when you're cutting. So you could either measure it out and draw a 1/2 inch line, or you could just eyeball it. And that's usually what I do. I just eyeball a 1/2 inch. It looks like about a 1/2 inch. Because it's me that's eyeballing it, I know when I stitch it, this is the amount that I need to stitch in. Right. So I'm going to give myself that 1/2 inch. Ooh, my scissors need sharpening. There's 1. And then I'm going to pin this guy down again. Bloop. And cut 2 of these. So I have cut out 2 pieces of my material that I'm going to use for my collar, and I'm now cutting out 1 piece for the interfacing. And you should know that, when you go and buy material at Joann's, it comes folded. So it's usually like a 45, 44 inch piece of material that's folded in half and then wrapped on a bolt. Interfacing comes as a single length. And so I usually just create a fold knowing how deep my my project is going to be. So I just folded it up this amount. I've got it set on the fold. Bloop. Then I'm going to cut that baby out. Those are my Mandarin collar pieces, okay? 2 cut on the fold out of my fabric, 1 cut on the fold of my interfacing. I'm going to show you really quickly how to fuse the interfacing onto your cut collar pieces. I probably won't include this on every single one of those videos. So on the flat collar, on the standing collar, I just come back to the Mandarin collar video if you have forgotten how to use interfacing. Okay, so this is the Mandarin collar one. Bloop. And I have cut the piece of interfacing, and you want to feel the interfacing. One side is a little bit rough, kind of sandpapery, and the other side is nice and smooth. The rough side is the glue. I get into a habit and just have my inside, when I open this up, the inside is my right side. So I want to attach the glue side to the wrong side of my fabric. Whoop. So, and it may be that it doesn't match up perfectly. That's okay, because we can trim out. The important part is the actual fabric. We can trim out the interfacing. I just picked it up so the interfacing is on top. You want to have a hot, dry iron. Don't use steam, because steam just adds moisture to it that you don't need. So you want a nice, hot, dry iron that will melt the glue into the fabric. And you don't want to like run it around like crazy, move your iron around, because that pushes glue. You set it down, move on to the next part, set it down, move on to the next part, set it down, and then I missed this little area over here. And I don't know if it's clear enough, the lighting's really bad here, but you can kind of see where it's glued and where the slats, ooh, that iron's dirty, are showing. So that's just a good indicator that your iron is hot enough. And then you can move it around just a little bit. You don't want to press incredibly hard. Bling! And then pick it on up. Then you may want to go in and trim off anything that's sitting, any interfacing that's hanging off the edge. I'm notorious for cutting my interfacing too large. What you don't want to do is, if that interfacing is, the glue side is pointing up, hanging over, don't set your iron down on that, because then you'll get glue on your iron. So keep it this way, and then you can just kind of pull up any ick, like there. I just had ick on my board. Oh, look how dirty it is. Okay, so go through and interface all of your pieces. You're only interfacing one side. So I've attached the interfacing to that side, and then I have my second piece. And you could go in, if your material's real wrinkly, you can go in and iron it. Bing, look how pretty, I've got my Mandarin collar. And then, just so I stay organized, I usually pin back that pattern piece onto the finished piece. And then go through, if you've done all those other collars, go through and iron all of your interfacing at one time, because then you can turn off your iron and be done with it. Okay, now we're going to assemble the collar. So first we'll build the collar itself, and then I'll show you how it attaches to your shirt. Just did the interfacing, so we are going to put our right sides together. I've got the interfacing on this side, so that's a wrong side. I'm gonna lay my wrong side against the table surface, and then my wrong side of the second piece. So I've got right sides together, pin that baby down. I did a 1/2 inch seam allowance. So you are going to stitch. Now I want you to start a 1/2 inch up. If you need to measure, go ahead and measure, but you're gonna start a 1/2 inch up. Don't start all the way down here. Start a 1/2 inch up. You're gonna go all the way around. Remember when I draw you the lines with the tailor's chalk? Stitch all the way around. You do not have to draw a line on your garment. I'm just doing this as a visual so you know where I'm stitching. And give yourself a 1/2 inch seam allowance there. We need this little bottom edge to be free of stitches because we need to be able to attach it cleanly to your neck edge. So go ahead and go and stitch yours right around that edge. This is for the mandarin collar. I have stitched that mandarin collar down and clipped my curves. So I've gone in and I've clipped just a few on that little curve. And then I went in, remember that we started a 1/2 inch up? I went in and I folded with it still wrong side out on the side that is the interfaced side. You're going to fold up a 1/2 inch and iron that down all the way. So I'm on the wrong side still. I fold up a 1/2 inch and iron that 1/2 inch in that whole way. Then you're going to turn this collar right side out, all the way down, right side out. Flip this guy, bloop, just like that. And iron this nice and flat. Make sure you go back and iron it flat. And when you iron it, you will have, remember that little edge that we turned down? That gets tucked inside. So your whole collar is gonna look something like that. I'm gonna go iron it really quick. I've just ironed the collar nice and neat. I'm gonna turn it that well there. And now I'm going to show you how to attach it to your garment. Remember this cool little, this is just the upper part of my shirt. Remember this part? Bling, bling. We are going to attach the collar into that neck edge right there. So, always right sides together. There's my front. Mine is going to open in a center front seam. I'm going to turn it over. I'm going to mark right here, shoulder to shoulder. I've got the halfway mark on that back seam, and that would be my center back seam. And I'm going to mark, I'm taking my collar, I'm folding that in half, and I've got where the center back seam should align there. So then we are going to lay pin to pin, boop, boop. And you're going to pin it's just one layer of the fabric, because remember we folded under that piece. Remember that piece that got folded under and ironed in? So we've got just that back layer available. So we're gonna pin, I go from that center point all the way over my shoulder seam. All the way to the end. Remember I added, that's just that little bit, I added the placard there. Okay. And then all the way around to the other side. And once you get that pinned in along that whole edge, you're going to stitch avoiding that fold. Don't stitch that fold in. You're just stitching that one layer. You're going to stitch that whole entire edge into that neck seam. Okay, so I went in and I stitched just that single layer. Remember I pinned it down and I left the fold going up, What you're going to do then is take your edges, those raw edges that you would have like your buttonholes, fold that in. I hope you can see this. Fold that in, pull your collar open, and tuck your raw edges into the inside of that collar. Look how pretty that is. Let me put some pins away. So I fold it over like where you would have your buttonholes, that little placard. I gave myself about an inch there. Fold that over. Then tuck it up inside. Doot. So the fold that you did and iron down, that first step, is basic. It's just going to barely cross over your seam that you just made. And you can clean up this. You can attach this in one of two ways. You could do a nice clean, okay, back to this side. Let me show you this. I'm folding over that little placard. Boop. Everything gets tucked inside of your collar. Wunderbar. Oh, it's falling out. You may want to iron that. I don't want to iron it yet because I'm using this green for all of the collars. So if I make a crease there, it may not set in as nicely. Okay. There. So then on this edge, this is the edge that's inside next to your body. You can do one of two things. You could do a really loose whip stitch that catches right up above your seam, your machine seam, and whip stitch that guy down. Or you could go on this side. Look how pretty and clean that is. You could go on this side and do a straight stitch, a top stitch right along that bottom edge of your collar. That's how you would finish it. So there, my dears, that's your Mandarin collar. I'll put it on a dress form and take a picture of it. And then I'll take it off and we'll do the next one.